By noon, the whole café had gone quiet enough to hear her heart break. She sat beneath the bright window with sunlight spilling across her untouched coffee, wearing a soft yellow dress and the kind of nervous smile people carry when they have spent all morning convincing themselves that today might finally be different. Across from her, the man who had agreed to meet her for a blind date looked at her once, glanced at his phone, and then stood up like she was a mistake he had no patience to explain. He muttered that she was not what he expected, pushed his chair back, and walked out before the waiter could even bring the pastries she had ordered for both of them. Everyone pretended not to notice. But I noticed. I noticed the way her fingers tightened around the napkin, the way her smile stayed frozen for 3 painful seconds, and the way her eyes filled before she lowered her head to hide the damage. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of one person choosing not to look away, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries. Because sometimes the smallest act of compassion can become the beginning of someone's whole new life. My name is Rowan Vale, and that morning I had only entered the café to escape the heat and my own sadness. It was one of those sharp, golden days when the sun made everything look alive, even when you felt empty inside. I had been walking since breakfast, carrying a folder of rejected job applications and a loneliness I had stopped naming. I chose the corner table because it faced the street, and I told myself I only wanted iced tea and 10 minutes of silence. Then she walked in. Her name, I would later learn, was Maris Solene, and she had arrived 20 minutes early because she was the kind of person who still believed effort mattered. She checked her reflection in the spoon, fixed a loose curl behind her ear, and smiled at every stranger who accidentally met her eyes. She looked hopeful in a way that almost hurt to watch. When her date arrived, everything about him seemed impatient. His shirt was expensive, his smile was thin, and his eyes scanned her like she was a product delivered in the wrong size. Maris stood to greet him, but he barely touched her hand. He sat, asked 2 questions without waiting for the answers, then looked around the café as if searching for someone better. I watched Maris try. She tried to laugh lightly. She tried to keep the conversation warm. She tried to make herself smaller and brighter at the same time, which is a terrible thing people do when they are afraid of being unwanted. Then he said the words that turned the sunlight cruel. He said she looked different from her photo, that he did not want to waste time, and that he had standards. He left cash on the table for nothing he had ordered and walked into the daylight like he had not just cracked a human being open in public. For a moment, Maris did not move. Her face stayed calm, but her shoulders trembled. The waiter approached, saw her expression, and quietly turned away. 2 girls at a nearby table whispered, then looked down at their phones. An older couple stopped chewing. And I sat there with my own pain in my chest, recognizing hers too clearly. I knew what rejection could do when it happened in daylight, in front of witnesses, when the world did not stop for your humiliation. My mother used to say that dignity is sometimes just staying seated long enough to breathe. But Maris looked like she had forgotten how. I do not know what made me stand. Maybe it was the memory of every room where nobody had stood for me. Maybe it was the sunlight on her yellow dress, making her seem brave even while she was breaking. I picked up my glass, walked across the café, and stopped beside her table. My voice came out softer than I expected as I asked, "Can I sit here?" She looked up quickly, embarrassed, guarded, ready for another wound. I told her I had been stood up by life in general and that her table looked less lonely than mine. For the first time since that man left, her mouth moved toward a real smile. She nodded. I sat across from her, not as a hero, not as a rescuer, but as another wounded person refusing to let her sit alone inside a moment that could have swallowed her. The pastries arrived then, 2 small apricot tarts dusted with sugar, and Maris stared at them like they belonged to some other version of the day. I told her it would be a tragedy to let cruel people ruin good pastry. She laughed once, a broken little sound that became a breath. Then she wiped her eyes and said she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. Outside, cars moved through the bright afternoon, people crossed the street carrying flowers and shopping bags, and inside that café, slowly, the air returned to her lungs. Maris told me she worked at a small community library on the east side of the city. She organized reading hours for children, helped elderly people fill online forms, and spent her lunch breaks repairing donated books with tape and patience. She said her aunt had arranged the blind date because everyone thought she was too quiet, too careful, too close to 30 to keep believing love would simply find her between shelves of old novels. She had almost cancelled that morning. She had tried on 3 dresses. She had chosen yellow because it looked cheerful. Then her voice thinned, and she looked out the window as if ashamed of her own hope. I wanted to tell her that hope was not foolish. Hope was the bravest thing in the room. I told her about myself too. Not everything, but enough. I told her I had lost my job at a design studio 2 months earlier and had spent every day pretending unemployment was freedom. I told her my father had died the previous winter, and since then, every ordinary task felt like walking through water. I told her I came into that café because I could not face going back to my apartment, where the silence had become too heavy. Maris listened with her whole face. She did not interrupt. She did not rush to fix me. She simply made space for my sadness, and somehow that felt like sunlight too. The afternoon stretched. 1 hour became 2. The café filled and emptied around us, but our table became its own small world. We talked about childhood fears, favorite books, terrible first jobs, and the strange cruelty of people who mistake honesty for permission to be unkind. At some point, Maris stopped folding the napkin. At some point, I stopped checking the time. When she finally looked at me and said she had been afraid the day would become one of those memories that hurts forever, I told her maybe it still could become a memory, but not the kind that ends with him leaving. Maybe it could become the day a stranger sat down and reminded her she was not invisible. We left the café while the sun was still high. The street smelled of warm bread and rain from a morning shower that had already dried. Maris insisted on paying for the pastries because she had ordered them, and I insisted on leaving the tip because the waiter had quietly brought her extra napkins without making her feel watched. Outside, we stood awkwardly on the pavement, neither of us ready to return to our separate loneliness. Then she pointed toward the public garden 2 blocks away and said she usually walked there after hard days. So we walked. The garden was full of noon light, children chasing bubbles, office workers eating sandwiches on benches, and pigeons marching like they owned the paths. Maris showed me the old fountain that no longer worked and the jacaranda tree she loved because it bloomed even when half its branches looked dead. She said that tree made her believe broken things could still become beautiful. I did not answer right away, because my throat tightened. My father had loved trees. He used to say roots were proof that invisible strength mattered. I told her that, and Maris touched the rough bark gently, as if greeting someone I had lost. Days passed, then weeks. We did not fall in love all at once like movies pretend people do. We became friends first, carefully and honestly. I visited the library to help her design flyers for the children's reading program. She helped me rewrite my portfolio when I was too discouraged to look at it. We sent each other photos of ordinary beautiful things, sunlight on a teacup, a dog asleep outside a bakery, a page from a book that said exactly what we needed. Some mornings, I still woke with dread sitting on my chest. Some evenings, she still heard the blind date's words in her mind and wondered if she was too much or not enough. But now, neither of us had to fight those thoughts alone. Then came the hardest week. The library lost funding for Maris's reading program, and the director told her they might have to cancel it before summer. She tried to act calm, but I saw how deeply it hurt her. Those children were not just names on a schedule to her. They were shy little boys who learned to read aloud without fear, girls who discovered adventure stories, lonely kids who came because Maris remembered their names. Around the same time, I received another rejection email for a job I had secretly wanted badly. It felt as if life had waited until we were standing again just to test our knees. Maris cried in the garden that afternoon, beneath the jacaranda tree. She said maybe caring too much only made people easier to disappoint. I almost agreed because I was tired too. But then I remembered the café, the yellow dress, the untouched coffee, and the way one small choice had changed the direction of a day. I told her we could raise the money ourselves. She stared at me like I had suggested catching sunlight in jars. But by evening, we were planning a daytime community book fair in the garden, with donated books, homemade lemonade, story circles, and a small art booth where I would sketch portraits for donations. The week before the fair, people surprised us. The baker near the café donated bread rolls. The waiter from that first day offered to help serve drinks. Parents brought boxes of books from attics and closets. Children made paper signs with crooked letters and bright colors. Even the older couple who had witnessed Maris's humiliation in the café came by the library and handed her an envelope, saying they had regretted not speaking up that day. Maris cried again, but this time her tears did not look like defeat. They looked like something being healed. The fair happened on a blazing Saturday afternoon. Sunlight poured over the garden. Tables filled with books fluttered in the breeze. Children sat on blankets while Maris read stories in a voice warm enough to gather every wandering heart. I sketched until my fingers cramped, drawing families, toddlers, tired mothers, and one old man who asked me to make him look younger but laughed when I gave him the same kind eyes. By 3 o'clock, the donation jar was full. By 4, we had raised enough to save the reading program for the season. When Maris heard the total, she covered her mouth and looked at me across the crowd. In that look, I saw the woman from the café, but I also saw someone new, not rescued, not repaired by anyone else, but rising. Near the end of the day, as the sun softened and the children chased each other through purple petals, Maris stood beside me beneath the jacaranda tree. She said she used to think rejection meant a door closing because she was not worthy of entering. Now she believed some doors closed because they were too small for the life waiting beyond them. I looked at her, at the sunlight caught in her hair, at the smile she no longer apologized for, and I knew my own life had changed too. I had walked over that day thinking I was offering kindness, but somehow kindness had found its way back to me. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries. Your support helps stories like this reach someone who may need to believe that one gentle moment can change everything. Special request: comment "I believe in kindness" if you have ever seen a small act of compassion heal a big wound. Months later, Maris and I returned to the same café. It was daytime again, bright and golden, with the same window table waiting as if memory had saved it for us. She wore blue this time, not because she needed to look cheerful, but because she felt peaceful. We ordered apricot tarts, 2 coffees, and laughed about how life sometimes begins in the exact place where you thought it had embarrassed you beyond repair. Then a young man at a nearby table was left alone by someone who walked out after one cruel glance. The café went quiet again. Maris looked at me, and I looked at her. This time, she stood first. She carried her coffee across the room, stopped beside the stranger's table, and asked with the gentlest smile, "Can I sit here?" And in that moment, I understood that kindness does not end with the person who receives it. It keeps walking, from table to table, from wound to wound, until the whole world feels a little less alone.